Pain is one of the more complicated topics you can deal with in training and rehab, but I'm going to give you my very simplified explanation of exactly how I think and deal with this with all of the athletes I work with coming back from major knee injuries. This is going to serve not as a complete breakdown of the physiology and science behind pain. Like I said, that's an extremely complex topic with multiple factors contributing to kind of why some of these things can show up. More so, this is going to be a very practical guide of what to do when this shows up in your training. What does it mean and what can you do about it in very simplified terms, so that way you don't need a PhD in physiology to be able to improve your recovery. All right, hats flipped around, now we're serious. So at the most basic level, what we're trying to do with any form of training, rehab, whatever it is just provide a stimulus to the body in order to create an adaptation. We are trying to challenge it, to force it to adapt and get stronger. So by stressing the body or providing something that makes it uncomfortable, the body has a reaction that says, uh-oh, I have to prepare for this level of stimulus again in the future. So it adapts, it helps you get stronger, so that way the next time you have to face that same stimulus, you're more prepared. So then our goal as trainers is to provide that stimulus and to do it in a way that's hopefully intelligent, where I'm doing it in a way that is an appropriate challenge for you. It's not too easy where I don't get an adaptation. It's not too hard where it's just too much for us, but it's also very specific to the adaptation that we're trying to get. So if you want to be a faster sprinter, I'm not going to have you swim thousands and thousands of laps in the pool, because yes, it's a very challenging stimulus, but the adaptation that I'm going to get is not going to be all that helpful for my actual goal of trying to sprint faster. So the stimulus that I need to provide needs to be specific, needs to help me achieve the actual adaptation that I'm looking for, right? So that's a very key concept within training in general. This is the whole reason the trainers exist, right? Is to get the dosage right and the actual thing right to make sure that we're moving in a good direction. So that's the whole concept behind training, right? Do a little more than we did yesterday. So congratulations, you can go be a trainer now and go help other people. With rehab or with injury specifically, this can become a little bit trickier to get the dosage right and the specificity right, because there's something that's broken there. There's damage, there's pain, there's limitation, there's things that I can't do because things can be painful, tender, uncomfortable, or because I don't want to further injure that joint. So it takes a little bit higher level of skill in order to be able to get the thing right and the dosage. And so this is where pain comes in. To me, pain is a very simple, very easy to follow guide rail that tells us exactly when we've gone too far with either what we're doing or the intensity, the dosage, how much of that we're doing. Because normally when I train, I provide a stimulus, I challenge the body, so I actually temporarily make it weaker, right? After a workout, you're more tired, you're more fatigued, so I'm weaker than I was when I walked in the door, but you give yourself some time to recover, and I come back not just to where I was, but just a tiny bit farther. So we are intentionally taking one step back in order to take two steps forward. That's the entire concept behind training for anything. Pain, again, this is a oversimplified explanation, but it's a very easy one to follow. Pain is generally a signal that we are doing more damage than we can actually recover from in the moment. It is a greater level of stimulus, of stress, than our body is currently prepared to handle. So instead of taking one step back for two steps forward, we're now actually taking two steps back for only one step forward. We're actually going backwards. We're digging ourselves a deeper and deeper hole. And the more I butt my head against the wall, the more I'm going to run into challenges and not actually get better. So this becomes a super easy guide rail to follow, and why I've felt comfortable training athletes coming back from third, fourth, fifth, even ninth knee surgeries in some case, because I know I have my line in the sand right here of, okay, as long as I don't overcook things, now let's just see what you can do on this whole side. Can I just train a little bit? Can I provide a positive stimulus without going over? And if we just do that for a long enough time scale, if I do a little bit more today than I could yesterday, eventually we start to look like we never had an injury in the first place. And so that's why I love this rule so much, because it's a really double-edged sword that gives us a positive on both sides. It helps make sure that we're both not overcooking things over here, right? I'm not doing anything more than I can recover from, so I can be pretty confident that I'm safe in what I'm doing. I'm not going to kind of injure myself, make things worse, anything like that. But then the flip side of that is, okay, as long as I don't cross this line, now everything over here is fair game. And now the more I can do over here, the fair game. And so for athletes, this is a huge mental switch of now it feels like, okay, now I actually can train again. I actually have permission to be an athlete, to feel like I can work hard, because so much of what you're going through right now is just, I'm broken. I'm not allowed to do this. I'm not allowed to do that. I don't want to make things worse, all of these different things. But now it's like, okay, you have this rule here. Now go be an athlete again. Now let's actually train hard, push you again, because coming back to that very beginning example we talked about of how training works, now the more of a stimulus I can provide, the greater intensity we can train at. Now the more of an adaptation we're going to get, the better we're going to get, the better we're going to feel. And this real concept, like this is how I train everybody. This is how I'm able to get results with athletes that a lot of other people aren't able to do, is because we don't make things worse, but then we also train them harder. We push them harder. We have a higher standard of what we're able to do. And because we're able to get a more challenging stimulus, we're able to get a bigger adaptation. That's it. And that's one of the challenges that athletes run into towards the later stage of the rehab process, is that things stop becoming a challenge. It's very hard in the beginning, but then we just start to go through the motions. It becomes a little bit repetitive. And to kind of give them credit where it's due, it's not necessarily their skill set, right? It's just not the thing that they're best at. But blending the rehab and the performance side, that's exactly what I do. And so we're able to take people who are partway along that process and, okay, how do we kind of ratchet things up a little bit? How do we get you not just able to play again, but better than you were before? This one simple guiding principle makes everything else we do so much easier to follow for us and for you. It makes it very clear of like, okay, this thing hurts. What do I need to change in order to make it not hurt? And so that's the trick, right? This is where it comes from an actual just like kind of concept or idea to kind of where the rubber meets the road, is like, okay, so something hurts. What do I do? And so this is where kind of most rehab camps will make one of two mistakes. They will either ignore it and push through, or they will pivot and change entirely and just not touch anything in that space. And both of those to me are a mistake. We already talked about it, like, hey, you push through, like 9 times out of 10, it just makes things worse. There is some nuance with all of this, and there's a little bit of room for exception, especially if you're very early in the rehab process. Like 3 days after surgery, your knee's probably gonna hurt. It is what it is. But when we're 6 months in, there's nothing in training that should be painful. If it is, it's telling me it's a little bit of a red flag of like, hey, there's something going on here that we need to address. So just think back with yourself of like, how many times has pushing through pain ever made the pain go away? It's very rare. So in general, we have kind of that camp over here, or they just pivot and like, ooh, okay, your knee hurts. Well, I'm just gonna go put you on the bike. I'm gonna go do battle ropes for your arms. And it's like, okay, we're doing something that's not hurting, sure. And we're getting a pretty intense stimulus, like battle ropes are hard, right? But it's nothing that is useful, productive, relevant to the actual knee that I'm trying to train. So the trick is, how close can I flirt with that pain a little bit without provoking it? So if you have a movement, a range of motion, an exercise, something that is painful, to me, I want to be able to train that area as much as possible. That is a signal that, hey, there's something that we need to do there. We need to create an adaptation in order to make things get better. So how close can I get with that? How can I get access to be able to train this without pain? And so the simplest kind of model framework that I will follow of, if you have an exercise that is painful, uncomfortable, first and foremost, can I reduce the load and probably increase the reps? So if I just take less weight into that same exercise, can I start to do this in a way that's a little bit more comfortable? And so especially for our exercises, some of the deep range of motion exercises, the deep squats, the split squats, things like that, you will see us do those with people very, not only under body weight, but actually supported, so less than body weight, where you can hand support with both hands on sticks, on boxes, in order to take some of your weight off, just to start to get into some of these movements, some of these ranges of motion without pain. And then as that becomes more and more tolerable, then we'll do that same movement exercise with your body weight and then with load, and we'll progress it that way. But that's a super easy starting point. Same movement, but without the load. If that's still uncomfortable, then can I start to regress the range of motion? Can I make it just a tiny bit smaller? And so we'll do this a ton with our step-ups of, hey, a 4-inch box is a little bit uncomfortable for us. What about a 2-inch box? What about a 1-inch box? And then like, okay, and that's the trick with these too, is like, so we're regressing that movement, but then can I make it harder elsewhere? So, okay, now we're only doing a 2-inch box instead of a 4-inch box. Can I double the reps? And so now I'm still gonna get a intense, challenging stimulus, but it's in a way that is positive. So that's the thing, like most people will get wrong with this camp over here. It's they just regress the exercise, but then they lose the intensity. And so then we don't get the adaptation, right? If I just drop the elevation for the box and now it's on a 2-inch box and I do the exact same amount of reps as I had prescribed at a 4-inch box, then now it's just easier than it was before. And like, okay, maybe if I do that enough over time, I'll start to get better, but we still want to keep that intensity piece as much as possible. And so this is, again, one of the real tricks that I'm able to do now with people in the, not so much in the late stage, but in the early stages, is we're able to find ways to train and train very hard, but in a way that's still positive and still lets us get a stimulus. And so this is a little bit of a tangent. That's where things like the sleds and different things like that allow us to get a very, very intense stimulus, which allows me to get an adaptation, but in a way that's very gentle on the joint, doesn't cause pain. So that's the next one. Can I regress the kind of elevation? And then kind of third, if taking away some of the load, regressing some of the range of motion, if that still is not quite getting me to where it is that I want to be, then I will pivot and I will try a different exercise, but one that's as similar as possible. That's the key. Again, most people that we talked about kind of over here at the regression camp is they just pivot so far away that's not even in the same kind of ballpark as what they were doing before. But if our Poliquin step up, the step up with the wedge underneath the heel, it's really, really great for targeting the VMO. If that one's a little bit uncomfortable, even after I've unloaded it and I've regressed the elevation, then can I take the wedge away and do a Patrick step up with the heel flat? That one's a little bit less load on the knee, very, very similar movement. Then can I start to get into that? And now can I find a point of, okay, now this is positive, cool. Now can I do as much of this as I possibly can in order to start to get an adaptation and then make that next piece better when I come back to it. So this is a really, really useful kind of umbrella concept for you guys when you're going through this entire rehab process. It's something that's a very easy screen of, hey, is this positive? Yes or no? And again, it gives us permission to feel like we can start to train again. And then it can also be a little bit of a screen for you guys for the practitioners you're working with of like, hey, when something hurts, like what's the reaction? Do they just ignore it and push you through it? Do they pivot and just ignore what you're doing entirely and do something completely different? Or do they actually have the skill set, the ability to make the minor tweaks, the minor adjustments to be able to stay kind of where it is that we want to be and now start to get a positive stimulus? It's a great way, like I said, it's a little bit of a vetting process to be able to see like what is the actual level of skill of the people that you are working with. A super easy kind of framework there. So something that overall is probably the single kind of guiding rule, golden principle with all of the training that I do, with all of the people that I've worked with. It is something that has allowed me to, like I said, work with some very, very, very challenging cases and be very, very successful. And it's something that makes it very, very confident for you guys that you can be doing something that is positive and not uncomfortable. So if all of that makes sense, and if you're looking for help with your own training, rehab, recovery, send in a training application just so we can start to have a chat about kind of where you're at. Also, if you want more help, more guidance with these kind of movements, with the exact kind of exercise progressions and regressions for some of these main exercises we use, I have an entire free 1-hour guide where I go through some of the big exercises that I personally use in my training and exactly how we regress, progress each and every one of them, how to scale things up or down to find an intensity that's good for you. So if you want to, you can check that out here. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.